I love the Convoluted Universe books.
All right.
They're wonderful.
And if you listen to the rest of the show, I'm going to be talking about a conference we're putting on.
Okay, I'll be back on listening in just a moment. Thank you very much.
Okay, and thank you for calling.
You're welcome.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye. So, OT, you were correct. OT?
About what?
That there was somebody trying to talk.
Yeah, well, I heard this weak little voice in it. I couldn't quite make it out.
Well, I heard tones, and Don always said if there was going to be a call-in, he would make little tones. Some way, but I've never had it happen, so I couldn't figure out who this was. Okay, but let me finish my story, and then we can go back to the other.
Yeah.
Okay, as I said, OT was wondering how we got his name that we sent his catalog to. And because he had never been anywhere, heard me or anything, and he knew he had not ever put his name on any of our lists. Then he said, "How did you get my correct name?" And I said, "What do you mean?" Well, now everybody's going to know this. Okay?
That's all right.
But OT's real name is Orville, which he hates. So he said he has never used it. He's always used the initials OT. And he said the only time anyone uses the name Orville is when his guides are trying to communicate with him and get his attention. But on the mailing list in our computer, the way his name was listed was Orville Bonnett. Now, he said he would never have put that name down like that. Now, somebody else was involved with this. You know what we mean by somebody. Somebody from the other side apparently wanted all of us to get together because it has resulted now in 3 of OT's books being published.
Yeah.
So the people on the other side do work in strange ways.
Well, if I can add something to this, everything you're saying is true. But I had written about 100 publishers trying to get somebody to publish Reincarnation, The View from Eternity.
Yeah.
And we've gotten nowhere. And so finally I just said to my guide, look, if you want this published, you're going to have to do it because I don't know what more to do.
Well, apparently the guides know how to use the computer because they got your name in there.
Yes, they do.
It was very strange. You know, is there time for you to tell the story out of the Reincarnation book of where you were in the operating room and your guides were yelling at you?
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, that's a good story.
Example of how they use your name.
Well, when I first started practice, I was an associate with another general practitioner for a year. And he did vaginal surgery, which is something I really didn't do. I wasn't comfortable doing that. But at any rate, we operated on a woman to repair her pelvic floor. She was a young woman. Her husband was an attorney, and she'd had 4 children. They were all under the age of 6, and she desperately needed some surgery. So I assisted with the operation, and everything went well. And the afternoon of the surgery, my associate said, call the hospital and see how the lady's doing. And so I called, and the nurse said, well, we wondered when you were going to call. She's been in shock all day. And I said, well, how do we know she's in shock if you don't tell us? So I hung up and told my associate what was going on, and he said, well, go over and get some blood started, and I'll get a hold of the leading gynecologist in town and be there as soon as I can. So I went to the hospital and walked into the room, and the woman was sort of a sickly, ashen gray color, and obviously totally bled out. She had no pulse, no blood pressure. I couldn't even hear her heartbeat, and yet she was conscious. And her husband was there, and I looked. She wasn't bleeding on the outside, so the hemorrhage had to be inside. And so I said to her, I prayed, and I said, God damn it, God, if you don't want this woman to die, you're going to have to do something, because we sure as hell can't. And immediately the hair on the back of my neck went up, and I was absolutely filled with elation. I could have been jumping for joy. I knew something exciting was going to happen.
Uh-huh.
And her husband was there, and I said, I promise you she's going to be okay.
Uh-huh.
I said, they're going to get Dr. So-and-so, we're going to open her up and get the bleeder, but she's going to be okay. Well, this guy's a trial attorney. He said to me, I don't know why I should believe you, Dr. Bonnett, but for some reason I do. Well, I called the lab to get blood and found out that they didn't have any of her type. She was O negative, and we had given her 2 units during the surgery, and an OB emergency had come in that afternoon and taken the remaining 2 units. So there was no blood to give her.
Uh-huh.
And there was a horrible weather, the storm and high winds, and the nearest blood was in the blood bank in Peoria, Illinois, which was about 110 miles away, and no way to get there. And so this feeling of elation continued, and the other doctors showed up, and they decided to take her in and try to find it. And while we were scrubbing for surgery, somebody walked up behind me. And I turned to see who it was, and there wasn't anybody there. Now, all this time, I'm still covered with goose flesh, and I still have this feeling of something wonderful is going to happen. So we finished scrubbing, and we went into the operating room, and the anesthetist, all he was giving her was oxygen. And this presence took a position across the operating table from where I was, standing 5 or 6 feet back. And we opened the belly, and it was just hopeless. There was so much blood spread into the tissues that you couldn't even see normal anatomy. And the surgeon said, I'm sorry, your lady's going to die. He said, there's nothing we can do in this. And so I yelled at the entity again. I said, you haven't done anything. You've got to make this guy look and show him where to look. And immediately he put down the needle holder that he'd started to sew her belly up with and reached over and got a big 10-inch hemostat off the table, reached into all that purple gunk, and out squirted some blood. And he put the clamp on, and the anesthetist, who was on the other side of the anesthetic screen, who couldn't see a thing that was going on, said, hey, what did you guys do? And the surgeon said, what do you mean? He said, well, suddenly I've got a normal pulse and blood pressure. And he said, what is it? He said, 120/70, and her pulse is a nice, steady 76. He said, I haven't been able to get a blood pressure since she came in the operating room. And with that, the entity left. And the woman left the hospital a week later, perfectly fine.
But did you also say that the entity, it called you by the name Orville, didn't it?
No, that was when he was telling me to quit my residency in surgery to go into general practice.
Oh, okay, because you said that's the only time that you hear that name is with the...
yeah, well, my folks called him Orville.
Just trying to get your attention.
Yeah, I was named for my dad, who was a great guy, but I never liked the name. But I was getting ready to return to my residency after my duty with the Korean War, and our family's my parents' family doctor had suggested I go into practice with him, and for some reason I thought I ought to consider it, and so I spent about 2 weeks or 3 weeks praying and going over the decisions, and I couldn't figure out how I was going to make a decision that would affect my entire life. So I put the idea out of my mind, and one afternoon I was home and I was putting a stack of records on the record changer, and my mind was blank, and at that moment it seemed and felt as if somebody had taken me by the shoulders and was shaking me violently.
Uh-huh.
And I can remember being shaken a couple times when I was a little boy, when you sort of went, you know.
Yeah.
And I heard this voice saying, Orville, I want you to go into general practice.
Uh-huh.
And I started shaking, and I shook for a good 20 minutes. And when he got through, I put down he left, and I picked up the phone and called the hospital in Chicago and spoke to the chief of surgery and said, I'm sorry, I won't be able to return.
Okay, well, OT, I'm going to have to stop because the clock is ticking away here.
Well, that was a fast hour, wasn't it?
Well, it certainly was, but before we go off, I do want to tell people we are giving our first conference here in Fayetteville, Arkansas. We're calling it the Transformation Conference, and it is June 3rd and 4th of this year, and I am doing it to promote our authors. And O.T. Bonnett, Dr. Bonnett, will be one of our speakers, and he's going to be speaking on both days, Saturday and Sunday, speaking about the one day on what he found out about reincarnation and with past lives and the universe, the one book of Reincarnation, The View from Eternity. And on Sunday, he'll also be speaking about his work with medicine that was contrary to the normal medical practices. So I want to tell everyone about the conference, and we're also going to have many other wonderful speakers. But OT is going to be speaking on both days, June the 3rd and the 4th. So if anyone wants any information about the conference, contact us at 1-800-935-0045, 1-800-935-0045, or look it up on our website. You'll find all the information about the conference. The website is www.Ozark Mountain, which is the name of my company, but Ozark Mountain is abbreviated, OZARKMT.com. And you can also find out about the books and how to order them. So let's sign off now until next time when I'll have another wonderful guest. Good night.
Good night.
You have been listening to BBS Radio, a blogandservice.com production and a service to others endeavor. Thank you very much for tuning in to our radio program, and we wish you much peace and joy on your journey.